For our lunch and learn today. Give it a chance to get started here. All right. So, everybody, hey, thanks for joining today on March 18th, our Lunch and Learn with Connecting with Industry Leaders series. And we're really excited to be joined today by two really inspirational leaders and talking about a really interesting and compelling topic, especially right now. We have Mr. Tim Millwood joining us from Cummins, and I'm going to let him do his introduction as the Global Vice President of Manufacturing Operations. And we're also joined by Scott McGregor, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at Cummins, or I'm sorry, I need to get your title straight.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Scott from
I'm actually
Cisco, yes.
I'm a leader in the consulting organization, people consulting organization for diversity and inclusion. Our chief diversity officer is the fantastic Sherry Slate. So I want to make sure we get that straight there.
Awesome. And Scott is stepping in Becky's place, who couldn't make it today. So thank you for doing that, Scott. And we're talking about a really important topic about how we deal with the changes that we need to make in our environments today to make everybody feel included and part of the team and to the benefit of the team, because as we know, we get better products, we get a better world, we get better results when we consider the input and perspectives of as many people as we can from as many different walks of life. So I would like to invite Tim to start with an overview maybe about where your passion for this topic comes from, Tim, and what you think about when you think about this topic.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give a short introduction as well to start. So, Tim Millwood, I lead global manufacturing at Cummins. I've been at Cummins for 29 years, so I'm a more or less a lifer, which is not unusual at Cummins. If people stay with the company more than 5 years, they tend to stay with us forever. So, as Scott mentioned earlier, I am a Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket. Industrial engineering is my degree. I did engineering probably for the first third of my career before I switched over into a variety of management roles. But I spent most of my time at Cummins working in either supply chain functions of manufacturing or in purchasing. And most recently, in the last sort of decade, I led global procurement for the company for 6 years. And then in 2018, I moved to lead global manufacturing. So we have roughly 130 manufacturing sites around the world. Cummins employs about 60,000 people, and we have about half of those working in manufacturing. From a personal standpoint, I'm married. My wife and I have been married for 27 years. We have three great children, two sons and a daughter, from 25 to 16. So really growing up, not really kids anymore. My personal passions outside of my family and work are, from a sports perspective, I love to play tennis, and I race cars. So that was something that I grew up in my dad's hobby that he sort of passed on to me. So, but I'm excited to be here today and talk just a little bit. When you think about diversity and inclusion, for me, it's both something that is very important because of the company that I work for. Cummins has made diversity and inclusion a pillar of our core values forever. We had a very inspirational leader that led our company for almost 40 years, who had a very, very strong belief in diversity and inclusion and championed that not only in our company, but in every town and community where Cummins called home, right, and made a difference in every community. So it's important to me because it's been an important part of my work life. And then on the personal side, and I can share more later, but I grew up in rural South Georgia in a very racially diverse area where I saw lots of disparity based on race, but more importantly, from a gender perspective, I grew up in a home where my mom was the main breadwinner, and I experienced lots of shortcomings, seeing her work very hard, probably harder than a lot of the men that she worked with, and get paid a lot less, right? And that didn't help when it came home to us. So it's always been something that diversity has been very important to me, and especially on the gender side, it's something I've tried to be a big advocate for my entire work life. Scott, I'll stop and let you introduce yourself.
All right, great, thanks. I'm Scott McGregor. I am a people consulting leader in our People and Communities organization at Cisco. That's a fancy term for HR. And I'm focused on inclusion and diversity. Primarily looking at ways to grow both our gender and ethnic diversity representation in our early career training programs around sales, engineering, and other groups like that. And I build these tracks between our diversity organization and key business units within Cisco. I've been there for 13 years, and I've been in the IT industry for close to 30 years. Most of that spent either in sales or in a sales adjacent sort of role. It's been a great ride. I'm really excited to see some of the changes and things that are happening in the corporate landscape around areas of diversity and inclusion, and really glad to be a part of that. On the personal side, my training and education is a little different. I have business studies at North Carolina Central University here in Durham, North Carolina, but advanced degrees in religion and biblical studies. I'm also an ordained minister. So a lot of the way I approach diversity and inclusion is from the kind of, centered from the humanness sort of perspective, that we are all kind of the same. We've all been created the same, but there are also differences that should be celebrated. And those differences kind of come together to make us just much more impactful as we move forward as a team and drive different initiatives within our individual companies or groups. So super happy to be a part of this conversation, and we're really looking forward to see what we can kind of have conversation about today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, both of you. So in your experiences and having been on both sides of the receiving side of lack of diversity, and also from the giving side of creating opportunities, what do you see are those barriers, and what kind of things can we do as leaders to help, open up opportunities for people? Are there intentional things we can do? What makes a good team?
Tim, you want
to? Sure, I'll start. I think when you talk about barriers, Mary, that one of the things we've talked a lot about at Cummins, and tried to educate ourselves more on, is just unconscious bias. I mean, there's just a huge, I think there are just huge barriers that get created by people's perceptions and biases, both known and unknown. And so when you're building a team, so often people, they have a preference towards a certain type, whether that's race or gender or even personality and style. And if they're not intentional when they're building their teams, and they let that bias play a role, right, they will build a team that looks a whole lot like them, and they'll end up with a homogeneous team that is not very diverse. So I think those biases that we all have, it doesn't matter, what race, creed, or religion you are, we all have biases. And I think that's probably the biggest barrier that we encounter in building diverse teams.
Yeah, I have to agree there. I think, and I love what you said about it being intentional about it. One of the things that when I'm talking with a senior leader like yourself in our organization, or even outside the organization, is that, focus on the end. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What would you like to see in terms of the outcomes that you're going after? And if you can kind of co-create with the folks that you're trying to get proximate to, what those outcomes look like, I think that the journey, while still maybe a bit bumpy, because it's, breaking out of our biases and breaking out of our preconceived notions can be difficult. And as you pointed out, it doesn't matter race, creed, nationality, color, what have you. We all kind of come to the table, kind of believing and leaning in on certain things. So you have to kind of become comfortable with being uncomfortable as you confront some of your own biases. But again, kind of sit down at the table and say, if we have aspirational goals, for example, to increase the pipeline of candidates coming into our programs, if we want to diversify the number of schools that we want to recruit from so that we get a more robust and diverse pipeline to recruit from. And if everybody kind of sits around the table and kind of nod their head and say, yeah, I think that looks good, then it's almost like you are what I call learning while you earn, right? So you're earning trust with individuals because you bring them into the planning process early on. But then you are also learning about people because you're becoming proximate to those folks. So if a Cummins decides they want to recruit from a Tuskegee University, for example, or a Prairie View, which is both of which are historically Black colleges and universities, you're going to learn about those folks and the differences and similarities, which is going to be good for you. But you're also going to earn their trust because because they can see you going down this path and they can see you taking those journeys together. So yeah, the intentionality piece of it, I think is crucial.
I'd build on the intentionality. I think it's important if you're a leader of the team that you're very transparent and you're communicating, why you hold diversity as an important element of the team and what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because if you're not transparent and people don't understand where you're trying to go with the team, it doesn't work very well. When I led our procurement organization, when we were a team of 20 people, and when I started, we had 2 females on the team, and when I ended, we were 50-50, right? And I was very intentional all along that the diversity of this team doesn't represent what we should be, and it wasn't that I did that by myself. It was we as a team, right? Everyone was looking for the right talent. We were looking for the right people to fill the right roles on the team, and as we had, we didn't kick anybody off the team, but just as we had natural transitions, right? We just brought in more diversity, particularly in gender, and but again, it was about being intentional. Something that I hold up, I think, is a best practice that we're doing today is when we look at gender diversity, we do pretty good at the entry level. So if I look at college hiring, I would say we're pretty intentional about a balanced intake at the college level. And we grade our size of our roles and our jobs by what we call comp class, right? And so entry level is a comp class 1 to a comp class 2 is sort of a medium manager to comp class 3 is a senior manager to a comp class 4 is an executive level. And when you look in the pipeline, in comp class 1, we're very, very good, right? But then we're not all, and we have a drop off as we get to comp class 2, and then as we get to comp class 3, we have a further drop off, and so we're not pulling through the pipeline. And so for those comp class 4 sort of executive jobs, we have a committee in Cummins for supply chain, and no job is allowed to be filled by what I would call the old ways of the good old boy system of, I know somebody, I hire them, and I put them in the role. Every job has to be posted, even at a senior level. And then we have a review committee that reviews all of the candidates that are put forward to make sure that the hiring managers are doing their due diligence to actually make sure that the job opportunity is widely known, not just to their people they're close to. Because what we would find is you know, they would mostly fill those roles with people they knew, right? Versus making sure it was widely known. And that intentionality with that Comp Class 4 committee, it's been painful for me. I sit on that committee. We meet 7 a.m. every Monday morning. So not exactly what I want to do is have a 7 a.m. meeting every Monday, but it's made a difference. And we're pulling more gender diversity through into the higher ranks of leadership. So, but again, I think intentionality is a big way to overcome some of the barriers.
Wow, well, 7 a.m. meetings on a Monday morning certainly shows you what kind of priority it has for the company for everyone to show up like that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add, Scott?
No, I was agreeing. Listen, you show people what you're committed to by what you're willing to kind of sacrifice to get there. So
Yeah.
yeah, making sure you're in there early, bright and early at 7 a.m. to talk about something like diversifying your candidate pipeline. That's a win in my book.
Absolutely. Now, once the candidates come in, though, how do we make sure that they feel like they're really included? You know, to your point, Tim, you know, there are biases. Everyone has biases, unconscious biases that they may not even be aware of. And while everyone comes to the table intending to speak the same language in the same way, sometimes even though it's a comment somebody's making they think is okay, it might make somebody else feel uncomfortable just because they are unaware of that potential trigger thing, or somebody else just they're trying to do the right thing, but they just don't know how. How do we participate as the members in that ecosystem to help bring everybody along?
I'll go ahead and start there because that's where our inclusive communities come into play. So obviously we have enterprise level solutions that we drive to help people with understanding unconscious bias, how to recognize it in themselves, how to recognize it in others. So obviously everyone takes that unconscious bias training on a regular basis, and we change the scenarios around to make sure we're addressing any possible inequities around gender or ethnic diversity or other sorts of underrepresented populations. But then we also want to make sure that the leaders are able to have conversations with their leaders around, driving and modeling the right behavior around conversations about bias. And then in addition to that, once we kind of get the folks in, we have diverse interview panels to make sure we have folks that represent the full breadth of both technical backgrounds, scholastic backgrounds, geographic backgrounds, gender and ethnic backgrounds on these panels, so that individuals who are coming in can feel, okay, this is an organization that's serious about representing the broad scope of backgrounds. But then after those folks come in, we have our inclusive communities. So at Cisco, we have about 28 of those communities that represent everything from scholastic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, gender, ethnic communities. So we try to find ways to plug those folks into those communities upon arriving at Cisco, so they get a sense of, the lay of the land, if you will, through an inclusive lens that allows them to kind of get more comfortable with their environment. And I think it's important to do that, and not just like the first week, but make sure that week in and week out, those folks have opportunities to engage with people with similar backgrounds and similar likes and those sorts of things. Makes people feel more comfortable. People learn better when they're more comfortable. Stress levels are lower. People are able to kind of assimilate faster. And you also find people stay longer because they see, kind of like with Tim in those 7 a.m. meetings, they see there's a commitment on behalf of the company at a very high level to ensure that, not only do we want you here, but we want you to stay here as well.
Yeah, I think as leaders, I think there's other things we can do on the ground level too, one-on-one with people. Having been a woman struggling in a field dominated by men for so many years, I found it was really useful to help to find allies that could help. And I think the kind of help that can happen at a very granular level is to make sure that if someone's at a table for a meeting, they're there for some reason and they should have some input. And so if you see someone who's not contributing, reaching out and inviting them, creating a space for them to speak, I think can help to make them feel included. And then sometimes women who are speaking have a softer voice, so sometimes their ideas don't appear as strong. So amplifying by repeating what that person said often helps to overcome some of that quiet nature of a person.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
I think it's important. Mary, I echo your comments. I think from an inclusion standpoint, it really starts if you want to make people feel welcome and part of the team. It starts with your own, understanding of yourself, right? I feel like having a deep understanding of who you are, how you show up in the room, how you show up with people, how your behaviors impact others, right? And I think for me, that's probably been the most powerful impact in developing as a leader in the last 15 years is self-awareness. And so, everyone has this certain desire to be included or not, right? So understanding your level of wanted and expressed inclusion that you have, right? So at Cummins, we've done some things around, using the different psychometric tools and making them more commonly available, not just to senior leaders in the company, but to all managers in the company. So whether it's MBTI, whether it's SpiroB, whether it's TKI, the Thomas Kilmann on conflict, using all these tools to make us as leaders and team members more aware of who we are and how we show up. It's huge, right? Because once you understand yourself, then when you see other people in the room and you see how they are either responding to you or not responding to you, or how other people are impacting the room, you're less maybe defensive or even aggressive towards them around blaming them for how they're behaving, and more like understanding, oh, I recognize that behavior. They have this preference, they have that preference. I need to, as a leader, I need to work to accommodate that in some way to create, trust in the room and create the ability for everyone to be included. So I think, again, if you want an inclusive environment with your team, you've got to start with knowing yourself first.
I'll just add something to that too, and I think you also need to kind of let yourself off the hook in terms of how quickly you're able to make some of the changes that you might identify in terms of biases that you have. Attitudes take a lot longer to change than actions. And as a leader, you can kind of start to change your actions at that earn while you learn piece that we talked about earlier. You can start to change your actions, and as you change the actions and you see the outcome, those outcomes are kind of where you get your learning. So it may take you a while to maybe break out of some biases that you might have about, different geographic locations in the country. People might think, people on the West Coast think a certain way, and people in New York City think a different way. People in the South, Tim, where you and I both, there's preconceived notions about Southerners in some cases that are hard for people to break out of. But I believe that even if you identify those biases through any number of diagnostic tools, I think you mentioned a couple of them, focus also on the actions. And it's where those the kind of the delta between what your attitudes are and the actions you take, that's the work. And that you can kind of spend time with yourself figuring those things out. But the more you get kind of plugged into the actions, the doing, the observing, the sitting, the listening. Mary, you talked a little bit about things that you can do to make people feel more comfortable in meetings, people who might have a softer voice, people who may not speak up as much, different things like that. There's science that says that women unfortunately get interrupted quite more often in a meeting setting than men do. People who speak louder tend to dominate and they sound more confident because they're speaking louder and different things like that. And I think that's where the listening piece comes in. Hearing an idea and then using your position as a leader to amplify that idea in a way that gives folks an opportunity to kind of maybe reinforce it, maybe have a chance to expound on it, and then that's also a learning opportunity for folks. So now they're I didn't realize that you did that. Can we talk some more about that? Now you've removed the biases from what is, the way people hear things. Now that idea is front and center and those sorts of things. And you can do that on a regular basis as a leader to get more proximate to groups within your organization that you may not get to hear from on a regular basis. What ideas do they have, for the business and that sort of thing. And I encourage you to start there with the business. At the end of the day, everyone is here to, at Cummins, at Cisco, we're here to drive value for our customers. In our case, an inclusive future for all. So if we start with the fact that we're focused on the business and give people an opportunity to intersect inside the business, then I think the other learning can come naturally, gradually. And we don't have to, I don't like to use the word kumbaya because it sounds like I'm being dismissive, but we don't have to get to this place where we're just woke and we just have all this insight. It takes time. And give yourself permission to take that time. As long as you're making strides every day, I think it's okay.
I like your words there, Scott. Forward thinking, if we get together as a team, all pointed on a common mission, then our attention is on getting the things done. It is what needs to happen. That's where your focus is, right? And so focusing there enables us to take down the barriers of the things that get in between, right? And focus on the things that make us the same. At the same time, being educated on potential biases that might make people feel uncomfortable, but also creating a safe space for them to come and say, hey, I didn't feel comfortable when you said that, in a way that's not harmful to each other. Now, we had a suggestion, a comment. Somebody had made a comment here in the chat. You could make it live. Let's see. I think the challenge of being soft-spoken isn't that it's just a challenge for women. As leaders, I believe the techniques being discussed are good advice in general for leading an inclusive team. Yes, absolutely. Other comments from the group? Are there other people that would like to join in the conversation here? Morella, I'm going to call on you because you're on the screen. And I know you lead global teams because I've known you since 2006 or so.
Yes.
From a global perspective. Yeah. So, how do you deal with this new remote world and still creating opportunity and inclusion?
Yeah, thank you very much. You felt that I was itching to say something and very excited about what Tim and Scott were saying. Yes, more definitely. I'm in the same situation as you are with being a woman in an industry that is more men oriented, or at least driven. But in a nutshell, what I'm trying to do and what has been tried to be done for better or worse in our company is to create a healthy environment. And by healthy is, I mean the following. One, and the most important one, is to create a spirit of belonging for the guys that are in already, because whatever you bring from outside, if the ones that are in do not have that spirit of belonging, won't be able to promote it or further extend it to the newcomers. Then the other one is to feel, not only to say, that you are as good as your team is. So if your team is with their differences, because we are all different in so many ways, but we also complete each other. It's the same thing at home as it is at work. It's absolutely no difference in my opinion. So as long as you can create, and especially truly people exercise that, that's going to be successful, cannot be unsuccessful, because they will have a better understanding. Then the other one is just to consider always that people are different and they have different ways of learning or expressing, or at least I'm always trying to revert back to 4 different learning patterns for people, some more introverted, some more extroverts, some good at something, some good at something else. So as long as you keep in mind that nobody is the same, and you can find a way to stimulate them to express themselves. That's good, even being blunt sometimes. And then usually going to find solutions rather than guilty people. And what happened when we do root cause analysis is fine. We know there was an issue, but how do we solve it? I mean, what is the lesson learned? So turning negative into positive, I think, is really good. Sometimes you tend to focus on the negative, but most definitely that's not going to provide any good results on the longest term. And seize the moment, good or bad. Don't wait for later, because later may never come and maybe just frustration. And well, create synergies, especially business. I'm in IT, but I'm working with business a lot. So try to make it as a community rather than this idea that we are one camp and you are another camp, and just consider everything as a product. We're looking at the product in terms of people that are developing around it, business or IT, rather than different streams that are participating. Make it interesting. Nothing can work in a team if people are not exposed to their best of their capabilities to everything that's new. They will never stay, they will never contribute, they will lose interest, and they can be the best people possible if you don't expose them to challenges and new. They will never be happy, participate, and contribute. That's the same for the guys that are in as much as the guys that are coming. And I noticed that when we get skills from outside, when I'm hiring from outside, and people are more skilled than the guys I have in, as long as they expose all of them to the same level of experience, training, and so on, there is no fear there, which sometimes generates bias and reluctancy, that somebody from outside will take my spot, or I'm not going to be as good as, because they know there is always an opportunity created for them, and they will always find a niche into developing more. And that's why they are, I mean, most of my team has 16, 17 years with me in the company, and I have been 23. And as Tim was saying, I'm a little bit of a lifer. And then always challenge. I'm very good at, I think, which might not be always easy, at stretch goals. So I'm always pushing. I'm pushing the boundaries. I know it's hard, but they also know that no punishment is coming if they do not achieve it. But try to stretch as much as possible so people can reach beyond their expected capacity, otherwise say. So that's a little bit how I'm trying to, the best of our capabilities, with the remote work, with, you know, we cannot just increase salaries and rates and so on every so often, or do something that keeps people inside the company. It's just trying just to make them belong to something and thrive for the same goal. So that's a little bit. We don't hear you.
Mary, you're on mute, Mary.
Did I speak so much that you cannot speak anymore?
No, I was going to say big challenges in a cement company, right, Morella? A long day from the days you were climbing up on roofs to clear ice off of roof vents just to prove that a girl could do it, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, we did those
But,
things, right? We had to prove it. We had to be best. We had to be better than, we had to be best prepared, right, to overcome all of those other challenges, right? But it put us in a good place. And I love what you said about not being creating an environment where failure is possible. because, a failure really is just a tested theory that didn't work out. And if someone is afraid to test those theories, then you're never going to find the right path, right? And I think new people coming in, they're testing the waters. They don't know what those boundaries are. And when I talk with young leaders like that, in fact, there was a young lady I was just talking with last week about a similar topic about how important it is to keep the mission up front and central with your people. And then, but if things happen and it doesn't exactly go that way, understand it's not a straight line, and you tested something that didn't work out. So now you know that, right? So I think that's important for team environment too.
Yeah.
Mary, if I could touch back on something that you sort of introduced that question to Morella, is that I think the pandemic and how it has expedited the idea that many industries thought was maybe decades away, but it expedited the ability for us to work from home. Right? There's so many jobs that traditionally we would have argued, oh, you have to be in the office to do that, right? You have to be in the plant, you have to be in the office. I actually think from building diverse teams, some of the barriers that might have traditionally been thrown up as a gender barrier for women in terms of trying to maintain a work-life balance, especially during childbearing years, right? So when I talked about that pipeline, we're really good at getting 50% men and women out of college, but then that we have women dropping off in the middle, and often that is they get married, they have children, and they drop out of the workforce, or they have the perception that they can't do both, which we know they can, and we have some amazing women on my team that are mothers, grandmothers, stepmothers, you name it, right? They wear so many hats. But I just think that with the pandemic and learning to work remote, like some of those things about being able to balance that work and home, it might actually be more of an enabler, where women may not drop out of the workforce as much because they're like, if I can do that job from home, right, I can still be in the same building with my kids. I can do some things that I thought was too much of a sacrifice, or that I just thought I couldn't do before. So I'm actually excited about that being a potential enabler for helping with gender diversity with the work from home.
I totally agree. In fact, people are more productive when they can construct the workday to be comfortable with themselves. If we focus on outcomes, the accomplishment of tasks, rather than having a person in a chair for a certain number of hours, that's not really making the best use of that human resource. Scott, you probably have some comments to add in this human resource area.
Yeah, I would. And it's a little different. So just follow me here. So I got an article the other day from one of my friends around something that was in the New York Times. It's called the She Session. And the idea here is that there have been inequities in terms of what women and the sacrifices that they necessarily need to make in order to kind of be competitive in corporate America. Then you also have to balance things like childcare and home and different things like that. Most of the time, these were sacrifices that men of equivalent experience and position did not have to make. So now you have this balancing sort of thing. Well, the pandemic has actually pushed more women out of the workforce, and some of these women may not return. And they're at all different levels. So some are executive levels, and some are in entry-level roles and across the different areas here. So as we start to talk about, and I know part of what we were talking about today was decentering maleness in terms of what when we talk about a good employee or a competent employee. I heard you tell Morella, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, climbing on roofs to prove that you're as good as the man and that sort of thing. And as much as I admire that, that's also something we've kind of got to get out of, is decentering this notion of the job is what the men do. And so if you can do what the men do, you're winning. Well, maybe, and maybe some of that was also a way to, unfortunately, make it more difficult for women to enter into certain roles. So you have to kind of be a great homemaker, and then you've got to climb on the roof, and then you've got to educate the children, and you got to do all that and still get paid 85 cents on the dollar for men. So pay parity is an issue. Representation is an issue. And a historic, sometimes of funneling women who are competent business leaders, but into roles that we think are good for women, like HR and procurement and different things like that. Nothing wrong with those roles because those checks cash like the rest of them. But I think we do have to pull back and take a look at what role have we played in making it more difficult for women to stay in the workforce through the pandemic. I think Tim is right. Now that you can work from home, now that you can, a lot of companies are adopting very liberal practices. It's made it easier, but then you still have the pay issue. You still have the child care issue. You still have a lot of the other issues that are still in place. And I think that's something that we need to kind of, as we are decentering, the idea of what makes it, what makes a fair and equitable workplace, you still need to look at pay parity. You still need to look at the fact that it shouldn't cost you $25,000 a year for child care. If you're only making $50,000, $60,000, that's half of your gross pay that's going toward child care. So what sorts of things are corporations doing to allow to give, for example, concessions to help working mothers pay for child care in different, and not punishing single mothers who don't have another income in the home for almost saying, I have to leave the workforce because I don't make enough money these are old, kind of old issues. And I know they're uncomfortable issues sometimes to have conversations about, but that's where the growth is. The delta between kind of where we're trying to get to and where we are, that's the work. And we still have a lot of work to do there. And I applaud, leaders like Tim, like Marilla, who are out there doing things to do that. But we need to have them amplify the need to have those discussions around things like pay parity and representation with their other corporate peers in organizations.
Rachel, you came on. Did you want to say? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. First, Scott, I have to commend your suit. I have not seen someone that dressed up in over a year, and you're making me rethink my yoga attire over here.
Thank you so much for that. I was so excited. I said, I'm going to put a jacket on.
Right.
Still have sweatpants on the bottom. No, I'm just kidding. So I work for LinkedIn, and I sell LinkedIn Learning, which is a professional development resource that companies use. Hopefully Cisco's using it. But we help teach things like unconscious bias, how to create inclusive teams, etc. And my question is a little selfish in nature, but sometimes when I'm talking to my customers and we're talking about diversity and inclusion, I can tell there's a little bit of hesitancy from them about pushing it and pushing the content and making it front and center. When that happens, I naturally go into sales mode. What's the ROI? What's the impact to the bottom line? And obviously everyone in this room understands the importance of that, so we don't need to preach to ourselves, but I'm curious from your perspectives being senior leaders, how you create buy-in when you can tell there's a senior person maybe in the C-suite that's not 100% bought in, and how do you talk about the impact on the business to help generate that buy-in?
I'll let one of the other leaders who probably have implemented some of that training speak, and then I'll follow up with some of my own thoughts.
So, I mean, from a Cummins perspective, Rachel, I'd say we're blessed that when I say that diversity inclusion is just part of the core values of the company and it's embedded with every leader. We're a 100-year-old company. We've only had, I think, 5 CEOs, so we don't have a lot of turnover in the company, and it's just absolutely part of who we are. So there is no hesitancy for a senior leader to talk about it, right? Whether it's gender or racial equality. I mean, we have some amazing initiatives. Cummins Powers Women that works with organizations like Girls Inc. to how do we empower and lift our girls up around the world, right? We have a great initiative following on to support Black Lives Matter, where we're working on social justice and criminal justice reform in our communities and working with, so it's just like, it's front and center. And I'll just, to say that, every large company has a vision and mission statement, and they say they have these core values. The way I would explain it is often when we have people come in at a middle manager or senior level that have been at other big companies, and they get to Cummins, they spend a little time, and the first thing I'll always hear them say is like, when I was at that company, we had those policies and those sayings on the wall, but like, you guys really mean it here. Like you're like, it's like how you operate. Like, it's part of your decision making. It's part, like, and that's like, it is, right? So, so I'd just say, I wouldn't say that, I can't say that, every single senior leader is perfect in this space, but I can tell you my experience has been from the CEO down, that diversity inclusion has just been huge, hugely supported. The transition we've made in the last couple of years that I think is an important point is we had a lot of diversity initiatives, and we had a lot of focus on building diverse teams and diverse organizations. In the last couple of years, we've worked a lot more on inclusion because we recognize that we might have that diverse team sitting around the table, but if we're not being inclusive of all of their opinions and all of their input, we're not extracting the value that we meant by building a diverse team in the first place. So that's a big element that we've worked on in recent years to improve. Sorry, Scott, I probably rambled too long.
No, you're fine. The only thing I would add to that is our CEO, Chuck Robbins, has been just so inspirational in leaning in and talking about uncomfortable topics. That some people say, well, why are we being so political? Why are we talking about things like community policing and police reform and mass incarceration? Why are we talking about these things? Well, in order to support the business, you have to support the people that run the business. And these things affect the people that work in Cisco, which means they affect how the business is run. And when I, as a Black man, come to work, I can't leave as much as I would like to. I can't leave what happens with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all these things, these flashpoints that we saw in 2020. It's going to cause a level of tension that's going to make it difficult for me to do my job if I can't also come to a workplace where being able to talk about those things, but also know that my leader is like, we support you in dealing with these things. We want to give you a safe space or safer space to have these discussions and dialogue. And that goes all the way up to the highest levels of the company. That's very powerful in terms of making me feel better. I can then kind of share that with people that I mentor and coach that come through the company and let them feel better, other leaders. So it does definitely start at the top. But there are always going to be people who, they hear that and they say, yeah, and they move on. You can't really worry about them. You got to take that coalition of the willing that says, well, I'm in because my leadership is in, and I want to be in step with my leader. And eventually those things kind of work themselves out. When you're not in step with the senior leader, you sometimes find that maybe that's not the right environment for you. So Chuck has been courageous in really making sure that Cisco is the type of place where we can have these discussions and we can take on these issues. And for those folks who find that they don't want to have that conversation, maybe it's, maybe those folks might end up doing something different, and that's also okay. I think back to your original question, how do you handle that? You roll with the people who are ready to roll with you, right? So if folks are ready to have these discussions, you take those folks and say, we're doing it. And what ends up happening is sometimes that gives courage to other people who are kind of leaning back and saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm ready to jump out there and be that courageous. It actually has the kind of secondary effect of emboldening and empowering them. And before you know it, you think it's like there's only 2 or 3 of you out front, fighting a good fight. And then you kind of glance over your shoulder and all of a sudden there's like 7 or 8, 9, 10 more people that you hadn't expected to stand up and say, because you had the courage to kind of lean into this very important issue, I'm going to lean with you. That's the rolling thunder that we talk about, that we like to drive across these enterprises. That's really leading to the sea change that we're seeing with great companies like Cummins, Cisco, LinkedIn, Facebook, different companies like that are all kind of just saying, hey, we're going. If you're with us, you're with us. If you're not, you'll figure it out.
It sounds like Scott and I are recruiting a little bit, but I would just say that we both work for great companies, and we're proud of the companies we work for because they do these things and they stand for these things, and the people that are in leadership in these organizations. So there's when you hear the pride that Scott has in talking about, the company, right? That's a great thing, right? That should be, if you think to yourself, is Cisco a company I would want to consider working for? There's a prime example of yeah, I probably would, right? It's a company that represents the kind of values that I would want to work for.
I think that brings it back to exactly why you would want to be diverse and inclusive, because it makes a better company overall. It's that business message. It makes a better mission. And it takes leaders like the people who are in the session today as we go forth and lead our own organizations. Anyone who's listening to this goes forth. It's your role to create that diverse and inclusive environment. The buck stops with you. So you have to take an active role, and hopefully everything that we talked about today will help you with some ideas on how to do that. So I want to thank Tim and Scott and Morella and Rachel and everyone who participated in this conversation today. It was really a fantastic one. I knew it would be. And I'll invite you to tune in next month for our next topic for connecting with industry leaders. So thank you for today, and I'll see you next month.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.